Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra deck tech. Today I want to talk to you about the hot new kid on the block since the latest balance patch, the new Noxus Aggro thanks to the buff of Darius and Basilisk Rider. And yeah, I want to talk about a few details of the do's and don'ts that I think about the archetype. But before we do, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below to not miss out on future content. And let me briefly introduce you to today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, one of the leading virtual private network providers out there. A virtual private network keeps your data secure and yourself anonymous while using the internet. NordVPN comes with super fast servers, allows you to unlock your favorite entertainment websites like Netflix. They provide a 30-day money-back guarantee. They also have an included cybersecurity suite, which acts as an ad blocker to boot. They don't lock any of your data, provide a 24/7 customer support, and you can use it on up to 6 simultaneous connections, so one account covers most or all of your electronic devices. And most importantly, they don't have any bandwidth limit, so you can use it non-stop without it getting throttled, which is particularly important for heavy users like us. It also won multiple awards and comes highly recommended by top technology experts. So if you're still surfing online without a VPN, now is the time to change that. Get NordVPN now, 70% off for a 3-year plan, including 1 month extra for free using the code ManuS or the personalized link in the description down below. And now on to today's content. Alright, so this deck has been around since the first couple days of the patch basically. When the changes happened, I explored some directions of Noxus myself. What I tried to do was go into a bit more of a Trifarian might-based direction, so a lot of big units, might, and just curve out, beat down hard. But that ultimately didn't work out that well. You end up playing too many like medium quality cards, so it makes more sense to kind of just lean into the individually good cards that this version does, while sort of technically hitting less hard, but just having a higher card quality and being more sound. I also explored some splashes. The splash that I liked the most initially was Freljord, mainly for Hawk and maybe for like Elixir of Fury. But then someone, I don't know who specifically, came up with a list very close to this with 3 Harrowing, and Harrowing also getting buffed certainly matters quite a bunch here. And that was actually a really smart addition that kind of pushed the archetype over the top, I think. And yeah, after having tried a bunch of different things and thought about the archetype a bunch, there isn't really much you can do from the original list that the person came up with. Like I said, if you know in the comments who was the first person to come up with this list, this archetype, let me know in the comments down below. I am not aware who specifically it was. It just kind of started showing up on Twitter in the retweets and stuff from Runeterra decks. And I'm not sure who the innovator of this list was. But yeah, Harrowing, great addition to the deck. Let's talk about the deck a bit. So first off, the original version had 3 Harrowing and 1 Atrocity, which I think is a pretty sensible splash, because if you look at Basilisk Rider, it doesn't even have Overwhelm if you don't have Allegiance, so it's just a 4-cost 5/3, which is really bad. So I think you ideally want to stay away from the usual 6-card splash in Basilisk Rider decks, if you can. And obviously, like in any Allegiance deck, other than maybe certain Yordle Grifter type decks, you want to stay away from more than 6 cards anyway. So just don't put more than 6 splash cards in your Allegiance decks. It's not worth it. Sorry about it. So I think because of what I mentioned with Basilisk Rider being particularly bad if it whiffs in this deck, because this deck highly depends on Basilisk Rider coming down on 4, being a 6/4 Overwhelm, and applying a lot of pressure, the difference between that and that not happening is so stark that I think you make your deck so much worse by reducing the chance of that happening than you make your deck better by adding cards. Part of this is also why I removed the Atrocity. I was still dissatisfied with my whiffs on the Rider, and I also felt like while Atrocity seems like a nice addition at first, since Darius is in a way like They Who Endure and you have this burn potential. It just didn't play that well in the deck. A lot of the time, if your Darius got to stick and attack once, you would win anyway. You didn't need to Atrocity. Then, used on most other things, Atrocity is basically just more or less a Decimate. And 3 Decimate are fine. Some people don't even play 3 Decimate. And I think Decimate is a bit better than Atrocity in the sense that it's more flexible, because it doesn't get stopped by interaction on your unit in response, and it doesn't require a unit or a big enough unit. And unlike They Who Endure, with Atrocity, this deck has Harrowing. So once you get to the state where you, for example, go Darius, a Basilisk Rider, into Atrocity in the same turn, you have 3 Harrowing to do the job, to kind of go over the top and win. Where the They Who Endure deck had They Who Endure and Atrocity. Here you have Darius and Harrowing. So it seemed like a bit of an overkill. I wasn't super happy with the Atrocity. I'm not 100% sure on it, but that's where I'm leaning right now, and I'm not missing Atrocity. And it seemed like a marginal addition relative to having a cost on your Basilisk Rider. If it was a more high impact card like Harrowing as the 4th card, I would be much more inclined to take the taxing on the Basilisk Rider than with Atrocity, which I didn't feel super happy with in the first place anyway. So what I'm currently running is just a single rearguard. 6 1-drops is a little light for an aggressive deck of this kind. Rearguard isn't great, but it's still fine. It still attacks into a lot of units well. It's just kind of fragile and awkward against like deal 1 stuff and 1/1s, but makes the deck curve out a little better. There are other options, basically, if you want to stick with Noxus cards and you don't want like you to lower the curve and make your deck curve out a little smoother. Things you can consider is something like Elixir of Wrath or Brothers Bond for some additional sort of damage and combat trick potential on some of your Overwhelm units or your smaller units like Disciple and stuff. Another reasonable option, in my opinion, would probably be a single Whirling Death, which plays well with Draven and plays well with the Overwhelm units, but the deck has a lot of units that don't function that well with Whirling Death due to the size, so I shied away from that for that reason. Then there is Decisive Maneuver, which is actually pretty decent. Like, they block your Overwhelm dude, you stun the unit and deal a bunch of extra damage, but it's a bit clunky and a bit situational, so I'm not super happy with it. The other option is Kato the Arm, which is very reasonable, and I probably like it a bit better than Maneuver because it's a bit more universal and robust. You don't need anything to happen, you can just plop it down on 5. If you have another unit, it's great. If not, it's still an okay 5 attack unit that hits the opponent. So it's fairly versatile. And that's really all that I can think of in terms of options for that one outslot. And currently I lean towards the rearguard just because it's cheap and efficient and kind of what the deck probably needs the most. The other thing that I want to talk about is I see like the initial lists that I saw, and most lists that I'm still seeing, only run 2 transfusions. And that is so wrong in my opinion for so many reasons. The same way it was in Burn. It's just so good. Like, if you run Disciple, there's no way you don't run 3 transfusion. It's great with Disciple. It's great on the Overwhelmed units like Rider and Ballista to make them survive a combat to be able to attack again. It's great to sort of protect the unit from removal, like the Mystic Shot one of your smaller units. You just transfusion, keep it alive, deal it 2 extra damage. It's just such a good card in the right deck, and this is the right deck, so there's no reason to not run 3, really. I think the 3rd transfusion is probably better than the 3rd Noxian Favor in the deck, and you don't see people running 2 Noxian Favor either, so just do yourself a favor, run 3 transfusions. There's really no excuse not to, in my opinion. The other thing that I have recently started seeing is people playing Elise. First of all, they still play the Atrocity, so they play 7 Shadow Isles cards. That is a big, big no-no. And I think even the 6, like I said, is a kind of a big no-no because of how poor Basilisk Rider is without Allegiance. If it was a 5/3 overwhelm that would just gain +1/+1 from Allegiance, it would be much more fine to go like 6 splash cards, drop the Atrocity, play Elise, that's okay. But since that's not the case, I think you need a really good reason to put in more Shadow Isles cards. And look at the deck. The deck has 3 2-drops. Sure, to be fair, Demolitionist is not a real 2-drop. If you don't have a 1-drop, you can still play it on 2 as just a 2-cost 2/3. It's not great, but it works, so you still curve out. So you have up to 9 2-drops, but you only have 3 3-drops with Ballista. So why would you replace your second 3-drop, like 3-drop 4 to 6, with 2-drop 10 to 12? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, especially in a deck that also has Transfusion. So sometimes if you skip turn 2, like you have a 1-drop, nothing on 2, and then you float 2 for Transfusion because you don't have a tech token anyway, and then on 3 you play like a Ballista and you have a 1-drop and a Ballista and a Transfusion, for example. So you really don't need more 2-drops. Also, is Elise that much better than Draven in this deck? I don't think she is. Like, she's fine, she's solid, like, it's a good card, obviously. But she doesn't add, she isn't like that much of a power level increase over Draven. She doesn't even arguably fit better in the curve than Draven in a way. And there's a real downside to putting her in your deck, because you have an Allegiance card. So I think the bar needs to be much higher than an Elise to add an additional non-Noxus card to this deck. And I think Elise just doesn't clear the bar, since Draven is totally fine, arguably fits a bit better in the curve, and isn't notably worse, especially if you account for the fact that he actually doesn't make your Basilisk Riders with. So yeah, really not a fan of this Elise trend, would highly recommend against it for the reasoning I gave. Otherwise, I think you just want 3 of all the good cards, and then you have this 1 slot that can be an Atrocity, a Rearguard, or a Kato, or some of the other like more fringe cards that I mentioned basically. But yeah, deck's very straightforward, very robust. It has a very solid like proactive curve aggro beatdown plan, and then in some matchups where that is not enough, or where they kind of like slow you down and sort of wear you down, you have your 3 Harrowings, or in some matchups where they don't have answers, you also have your 3 Darius to sort of finish things off. And then you just go Harrowing, and there are usually only like 2 good answers to Harrowing, which is Deny and Ruination. And obviously a lot of decks don't have access to either, or you can to an extent sometimes play around either of those by seeing if you can get them in a situation where they don't have mana for it, which is obviously easier with Ruination than with Deny. But all in all, yeah, there's a lot of power in the deck. Harrowing is the perfect addition for the deck, and really gives the deck what it otherwise is missing, because this type of deck runs the risk of kind of just being traded with too much, and kind of the opponent stabilizing at a reasonable amount of health, and then you're too low on resources to kind of push them over the edge, and you lose. So adding 3 Harrowing gives you a 1-card answer that sort of just solves that problem for you. And a lot of games that a deck like this would normally lose if you would play any other cards, Harrowing just wins on its own. It's just a really great addition, because it's that 1 card, that a single card that fixes a large issue of this type of archetype and wins a lot of games. A deck of this style normally couldn't win any other way, which is pretty great. I'm also seeing some people still splashing Freljord over Shadow Isles, usually for Omen Hawk, and weirdly enough, in a lot of ways, Raider, the 3/1 Overwhelm Tough, which I think makes absolutely no sense. Like I said, the deck has a sufficient amount of 2-drops, and once again, splashing a random 2-drop that makes your Basilisk Rider worse isn't worth it. Like, Raider is a solid card, it's a good card, it's not a bad card, but it's not an exceptionally powerful card that is way better than anything else. Like, it's not one of the best 2-drops in the game or anything. And other things I see instead of Raider sometimes is Fury, which is decent, but it's a bit clunky for the deck. It's a better addition than Raider, and I don't know, maybe you can talk yourself into something like 3 Omen Hawk, 2 Fury, play like 5 cards or something, which is fine, but I still think it's way, way worse than having access to Harrowing, because it just kind of props up your core. Like the Freljord just props up your core plan a bit more and makes you a bit better at that, but that doesn't have the same sort of impact on the deck's overall performance as the 3 Harrowing have, that don't prop up your primary plan a bit more. It gives you an entire 1-card secondary plan to win a lot of games that no propping up of your primary plan could ever win you, which is huge. And yeah, therefore, all I can say is, if you want to play Noxus Aggro, this is the list you should be playing, in my opinion. Like I said, the rear guard is debatable, but otherwise I think there's really not much to discuss or move around in the deck, honestly. But that's part of why I wanted to make this deck tech. I wanted to talk about these differences and these sort of misconceptions, explain why I think they are poor, why I think they're inferior, why I think they are misconceptions and stuff like that, to better educate people on these aspects of deck building and how to choose between different versions of a seemingly larger archetype like Noxus Aggro. Why Splash X is the right direction to go, and why this size of the splash is the right way to go, as opposed to that size of the splash, as in Harrowing Elise or just Harrowing and stuff like that, or even Harrowing Elise Atrocity, which is basically just atrocious, just like the name Atrocity. So yeah, just don't fall into these traps. They are just things that hurt your deck's performance overall. They make your deck less consistent, less reliable, and don't really make it notably more powerful in return. Like, keep in mind, consistency and power are kind of two opposite ends of an axis in deck building usually, and you need to balance them against each other. You can sacrifice consistency if you gain enough power in return. You can sacrifice power if you gain a disproportionate amount of consistency out of it. But trading similar amounts of consistency for similar amounts of power isn't really worth it. It doesn't really change the overall quality of the deck in terms of how, I don't know, its win rate will go or whatever, but it will make the deck less reliable, less controllable. So you will have less, probably less control and impact over the outcome of the games. The games will be higher variance, which is not exactly great if you want to perform consistently, if you want to win a tournament, if you want to climb ladder, stuff like that. And especially if the increase in power level is smaller than the consistency you lose, or you lose the consistency on something much more important while you gain the power on an aspect of the deck that is less important. So it doesn't only matter how much power and consistency you trade, it also matters where or in which aspects of the deck you trade them and how critical these aspects are. And Basilisk Rider, for example, is a very critical centerpiece of the deck, so losing consistency on Basilisk Rider is worth a lot more than gaining minor power level on your second champion or your early drops when they aren't in a state where they are problematic in the first place. Like, it's not like the deck is critically short on 2-drops. If the deck would have 3 2-drops, obviously you would immediately replace Draven with Elise to have a second good 2-drop, and rather have 2 good 2-drops and 1 3-drop than 1 good 2-drop and 2 3-drops. But that's not remotely the case here. It has been in some other cases in some other decks where that trade-off has been done and widely accepted, and righteously so, but not here. So yeah, I hope this is helpful to you guys. I've been quite liking the deck. It feels pretty real and pretty robust. It's also, in all of its variations, by far the most popular deck right now, especially in Master, but probably anywhere. Especially if you factor in non-Shadow Isle splash, like other splashes, Freljord, and some of the more fringe splashes past Freljord. This deck is easily twice as popular as any other deck in Master right now, so it makes sense to be prepared for it. It makes sense to know how to build it ideally, and also how to pilot it. And that's the next thing we'll tackle. We'll jam a couple games in Diamond on my way to Master. I'm currently like mid-Diamond 3. I haven't grinded a lot, but I'm slowly playing a couple games here and there off stream when I wasn't streaming to climb up. I haven't been losing a whole lot with most decks that I've liked and tried the last couple days. But yeah, we'll dive into some games with this, and I'll show you how to pilot it, and we'll see how we're doing. So far, I've been doing pretty well with the deck. And yeah, that's it for the deck. Quite a bit of a theoretical tangent here. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments how you feel about that stuff. And yeah, I don't think there's much need to go into the other individual cards. They're all just kind of like the best in slot for what they do. And yeah, maybe one last thing before we dive into the games about the deck in general. The deck is sort of like a big aggro deck. It's a bit comparable to something like red deck wins in Magic, for example, and similar concepts. It's a little bigger, but partially it is bigger due to the nature of the mana system of, like, if you get a mana every turn, you're much more inclined to put a 6-drop in your aggro deck than in a land system game where actually upping your mana resources costs you cards, costs you other resources. So you trade resources. In this game, it's not. So that's why your why your red deck win style deck looks a bit more like a big red deck, when in reality it's still just kind of the red aggro beatdown deck with backed by a bunch of burn. Here Noxian Fervor and Decimate. But yeah, at its core it's much closer to a typical red deck wins than anything else really. And that's how you should approach it, how you should play it, and also how you should approach it when facing it. Minimize damage, aggressively trade resources, even if it seems like an unfavorable trade protecting your life total. It's very important. And prepare for the harrowing to make sure that all the trading wasn't for nothing. And this deck sort of is the new phase of aggro or Noxus aggro, after burn has kind of fallen out of favor with some of the nerfs and stuff like that, and shifts in the metagame. Yeah, this fills kind of a needed hole of this style of aggression being missing. Anyway, now we're really done with the deck tech, and I'll see you in a moment with the games. In case you didn't notice, you can usually find the link to the games in the description below in the playlist, or usually I put a card up here directing you right to the games video. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in a moment with the games.